Hello everyone. Tonight's guests, well, it's night here, are Dave Churchill,
Hello.
Litabot,
Hi. Need what?
and Tyr.
Hi there.
Dave is a returning guest of ours, and he needs no introduction anyway, so I'd like to skip that. But the other two new guests I would like to ask to say a few words about themselves. Let's start with Tyr. Would you mind introducing yourself and telling about you and your bot a little?
Okay, so I'm Tyr. I'm from the Netherlands. I have made a bot, first a bot for Brood War. It's recently, since about half a year, I think, on my StarCraft 2 bot.
I'd like to interject here that I based on my first StarCraft bot, Brood War bot, on yours, your open source Java bot. So thanks for that, I guess.
Yes, no problem.
Feel free to elaborate on anything and everything you did.
Okay, the bot for my Brood War bot, it plays as Protoss. I didn't get around to Zerg. For my StarCraft 2 bot, I do play all three races. I've got a setup for my bot which allows me to quickly add on different kinds of strategies and customize the control for the individual units. For bots, there are a number of things that are sort of missing from my bot, I think. So for instance, for unit control, a lot of bots use combat simulators, which I don't use. Well, mostly I haven't really had the time to look into that. I would like to do that, but it's kind of difficult, and I also think it's to get right. For now, I'll do without it. Yeah, well, really my bot doesn't use that many very advanced AI techniques, but I use lots of parts to bring it all together.
So, Litabot, I would also like to ask you to say a few words about yourself, as much as you like.
Yeah, so I started my bot in like 2014. It was like kind of part of my master's thesis already back then, but I was working part-time and also doing my study part-time. And I based my bot on UAlberta bot, but instead of a Protoss I made it a Terran bot. And back then I already started adding some AI techniques in it, like using a star to determine how to build a wall, which is quite useful for a Terran bot. And already in the first CIG and AID competition I already got like 3rd place back then, so I kind of knew that I had a thing going there. So over the years I've developed some more, put some more AI techniques in my bot and got better and better. And in 2017 I saw that the API for StarCraft 2 would be released. So I've kind of switched my focus somewhat from Brood War to StarCraft 2. And for example, my the mineral getting algorithm that I made in Brood War, I also managed to transfer that one over to StarCraft 2, which some people already expanded on because I released it as open source. And well, now in 2018 I've slowly but surely put things from my Brood War bot along with some other AI techniques together to create pretty decent StarCraft 2 bot. But I've got a little bit sick this month, so I'm still putting the finishing touches on it to make some really big entry into this StarCraft 2 scene.
And I see on the ladder, I mean, it's no secret that your real life identity is Martin Rojakers, right? I can tell the audience about it because, well, everyone knows. And you have a bot named that, and you have Lita bot. What are the differences between that?
Oh, for the student StarCraft AI tournaments, and I think other ones as well, one of the requirements I think was that you actually had to use your real name, especially for the student division there. That's to properly identify you as a student and things like that. That's why my bot sometimes goes by my real name. But if there's no such requirements, I usually use the nickname that I've got right now, which is LitaBot. Which, for those who don't know, it's based on the professional StarCraft player called Lita, who was also a Terran player, just like my bot.
I must confess that my real name isn't Jumpy Doggo. Sorry if I let down anyone. So back to you. So you also proficient in StarCraft 2 AI, which is very great. I would like to talk about that a little bit later. Alright, we have a lot to discuss as the SSCAIT is in full swing. I think it's about halfway done, last I checked. What are your thoughts on the current bots and current results so far?
Well, as expected, the SEDA is doing quite well. There's no surprise there, of course. But you can still notice that SEDA has some problems which other bots can exploit. And I actually played against it myself. That's like me, not my bot, but it's me. And I was even able to just bunker rush it, just like my bot used to do back in the day. So SEDA still has some holes to patch, so to speak, which I don't think they've included in their machine learning, things like bunker rushes, because you don't really need to change your build order for that. It's more of a micromanagement thing where you have to use your work units properly. And SEDA did improve it from the last version I played, but still not enough. So because of that, SEDA is still vulnerable to certain rush order builds.
And yeah, there is a Cannon Rush bot as well. The Crazios Protoss version. I like the games of it. Apparently it's a hastily thrown together bot, but I think it's quite polished. A question that others have asked, that we seem to have a Protoss and Terran dominance on the ladder, mostly Terran lately, but quite a few Zerg bots are present on the ladder, and well, I don't know how many, but not in the top 15 or 10, not many. What do you think? Why should that be?
Well, the thing is that last year, 2017, it actually was quite Zerg dominated. The year before that, it was Terran dominated, and the year before that, in 2015, it was Zerg dominated. 2014, it was Terran again, and before that was many years of Protoss. And the very first competition, the AD 2010 with the Berkeley Overmind, then was Zerg again. So as you can see, the race that is dominant kind of seems to change each year. So it kind of flips back and forth from time to time.
Sorry, I was just going to say that I'm not sure if I'm looking at the correct results, but there are 2 Zerg in the top 10.
Oh, that's a little bit better than I thought.
And also of note is that I don't think Cherry Pie is taking part in the competition, and they're probably the strongest Zerg right now.
That's most likely true. I'm relatively new to the scene. I'm just participating in the last 2 years. Well, not personally participating, but keeping a watch on the results on the ladder. And so far, in the last 2 years, we had a strong Terran and Protoss dominance. I hope you don't disagree with that.
Well, as I said, like last year, 2017, you really saw the rise of some Zerg bots again, and at least especially in the beginning. Like if you look at 2017, the AI tournaments there, not just SS AI of course, but also the 8 and the 6, you saw Zerg bots kind of getting up there again. But now it has changed once again with SEDA and other Terran bots keeping up pace, and Protoss as well. They've been working on it quite a lot as well. So, but before that, like before I even began my own StarCraft bot, we already saw a bit of flipping there. But there it was like Protoss was basically the dominant force from 2011 to 2013. And in my period, like 2014, 2016, you saw like Darren be very dominant, and it has changed from year to year, no matter how you look at it.
Do you have any favorites? Question for everyone. Do you have any favorites right now besides your own bot? Which do you like the play or the style or anything new that it brings to the table?
I always like Purple Wave quite a bit. I must say for the SIC AIT tournament, I haven't really been keeping up too well with all the matches, but I like the style for Purple Wave.
Same for me. I also really like the Purple Wave. It changes the date. It's really quite a well-crafted bot right now. And it can also take down Seda as well, which is also quite interesting to see. I would say that Purple Wave is definitely my favorite currently.
I just really like the fact that Purple Wave is a unique bot in terms of its programming language, and I don't keep up on many of the strategies of the bots, but I'm obviously biased towards Saida using UAlbertabot as its base as well. That's pretty cool to see, like my 8-year-old code in a bot that's doing well.
Yeah, for those who do not know, Purple Wave is written in Scala, which is a very unique thing. I think it's recently migrated to JBW API. There is a good chance that I get this wrong because there are like 6 Java frameworks for BW API, and it's a different one than the one I'm using, which is the BW API 4J, which I'm only mentioning because the raw branch of it has been recently completed, which is not a type safe but mirroring the interface of BW mirror. So the intent behind that branch was to aid the migration from BW mirror. The functions are called the same way or very similar way. So I migrated my bot without problems. So anyone thinking of leaving BW mirror behind, check it out. Okay, that's enough for public service announcements.
I think something that's interesting to note about the results is that I'm not comparing the student StarCraft AI tournament to the AID one at all, but to anyone who may be like disappointed with their bot's round robin performance in the student competition. In competitions that run longer round robin, I guess, stages of the competition, if you look at like the win results over time, you can often see that the first 5 or 6 rounds of round robin, the results vary pretty wildly, and there's a lot of variance in there. So saying that like Seda is the best bot because it has 1 more win than Purple Wave is really not a statistically significant thing.
And let's discuss your ladder then, because I think many people are curious about that. How is it progressing? You mentioned in the last cast you were the guest in that you're working on your own ladder.
Oh, so since the last time I was on, there hasn't been a lot more work done on it, just because it was sort of the end of the term, and all the people who are work on it are very closely tied to an academic schedule. So it's like myself and 2 master students, and so they were busy with exams and marking and that sort of thing, and so was I. And so we're planning on working on that, hopefully getting something up and running that people can use early on in the new year. But essentially, it's going to be a 24/7 ladder version of the AI IDE competition with all the same rules, the same format, except for there should be a website where you can log in and upload your bots, and we'll store all those files and then schedule the games to be played on the ladder.
So there is no conceptual update on that. The concept is the same.
The concept is the same, yeah. We've had, like I said, in the past maybe in the past month, there's been a little bit of work done on it, but it was just a really busy time for everybody. But we do hope to get something up and running, not the final version, but just something public facing so we can test things. Like, for example, most of it works already. So you can there's a website that runs I think it's off of a Node.js server, and you log in, you upload your bot, similar to how the student StarCraft tournament does it. You can say download your replays, you can view the current results that are going on. But the big difference for those who maybe didn't listen last time is that it's the same as the AIIDE competition, and so the games will be run as fast as possible. So we won't have a live stream because of that, because the games are sort of too fast to watch. But it'll just be a place where you can upload your bots, and they'll be run on our hardware.
Will you support GPUs?
Yep, there will. So, like I said, it's just like the competition. It'll be run on the same machines. So the ladder will stop for the competition when it's actually running, because it's going to be run on the same machine. So we will have at least one machine devoted to GPU bots, and I think that's enough right now, because there's only one bot who actually uses that currently, which is CherryPie. And so we wouldn't want to say, oh, and with GPUs, you actually have to devote like a physical machine to it. You can't just use a virtual machine. Well, you probably can, but we're not really experts in setting up virtual machines. And so trying to set up multiple virtual machines that each have CUDA support is kind of a nightmare. And so we just have one physical machine that sits in the corner and runs the GPU bots. So,
is it colored beige?
No, they're all black.
Oh, then it's not a true homebrew server. It has to be colored beige and be dusty. All right. Speaking of tournaments, an interesting question was raised that what do you think about tournaments being closed source? I mean, or either not being closed source or open source not being a requirement. I know that you have strong feelings in the matter, but I mean running your own thing. But in general, what do you think about that? Would that help AI research? Would that be a interesting thing to have?
Just to clarify, when you said tournaments being closed source, did you mean that submitted bots have to be open or closed source, or the tournament code itself being closed source?
Oh, of course, the submitted bots. I mean, let's say being open source, disclosing the source is not a requirement.
Yeah, you say I have strong feelings, but it's not like I don't think that closed source competitions should exist. In fact, the ladder that we will be setting up will be allowing closed source bots. I just feel that for our particular competition, the stated goal of our competition is to sort of advance the state of the art in AI. And so we want that source code to be available so other people can use it and build on it. The fact that a better StarCraft bot is being produced is actually secondary to just trying to improve AI. So that's just our competition. And other competitions may have different goals, and so closed source bots can probably accomplish their goals.
I really don't care much if it's mandatory for a bot to be open source or not. I like that there are a lot of open source bots, but it doesn't have to be mandatory. But I do think it's very useful to at least have the bots to test against. So I really like that SSC AIT, the ladder, that you can just download any bot from there and test against it. Helps in creating a good bot. You can't really try to defend against a bot if you can't actually test against its strategies.
Yeah, same for me.
Alright, I have some a little personalized questions. Next one is for Tyr. I have information that you did quite well in the StarCraft 2 tournament scene as well, even won some prizes. Is that correct?
Well, I've won second place for one of the tournaments, so there I did really well. But I've participated in, I think, another 3 tournaments, and I didn't really get to the. But I hope that I can get some more wins. There will be another tournament in January, in a few days, the there's the deadline, I'll do well then.
Can you tell us in your feeling what's the difference? How is different the Brood War and the SC2 community? How big is it? How advanced? Well, that's maybe not the good word, but how intensive, how active is that community?
Community, it started out kind of slow. When I first started, there were 8 bots on the ladder. There are, I think last season there were 40 or 50 bots, something like that. Really picking up steam. So it's not quite as many people as in the Brood War scene, but it's kind of getting close, and you also really notice the competition getting tougher and tougher every day. And cool to see.
I actually have a question for Tyr. Since I haven't been really keeping up on the StarCraft 2 side of things, are there any? Are most bots implementing everything from scratch, or have any of the bots used existing source code bases?
It depends a lot. It's different between the different languages. In Python, the framework itself has a lot of code that gets reused a lot. In C++, there are a couple that are based on your bot, on Command Center. But there are also a number of bots that are built from scratch, I believe. So
Well, my bot is currently based on the 5-minute bot, which I think is based on the Command Center bot, but I'm not sure.
Oh yeah, you have SC2 experience as well.
Yeah, well, I've started working on it mostly this year. I've worked a bit on it last year as well, but I've started working on it this year. And my bot is based on the bot called 5-minute bot. But I'm not sure if it's based on Command Center, but I do see some code similarity, but I haven't really checked.
How do you feel? How far is the SC2 scene behind the Brood War scene? And I know that's not very well phrased, but yeah, you get the idea.
Yeah, I get what you mean. It seems to be mostly just like in. It seems to be like what some people say 2 years behind, where you've got bots that are able to macro and things like that, but the rush builds are still quite dominant. Well, in general, of course, the StarCraft 2 rush builds in the current meta are still a bit more prominent anyway, but regardless of that, you still see a lot of bots just doing either a rush or they defend against a rush, and then they go for like a very time push kind of attack. So it's still kind of like how it was in 2016 in Brood War, so in terms of playstyle.
So history repeats itself.
Pretty much, yeah.
But that's a good thing, I think. Oh, and you were fairly recently on TV in a AI competition in Netherlands. Can you tell us about that a little?
Was this regarding me?
Oh yeah.
Because I've been on TV, but what do you mean, like a live stream or?
Well, I just found a video of you speaking in Dutch AI tournament.
Oh, the Dutch StarCraft League. Yeah, I was there last year as well to give a talk as well. Well, this year that's was still a bit sick, so the talk wasn't that great. I still managed to do it though. But the thing is that the Dutch StarCraft League has been a thing before I even started to make my own bot. It was in 2012, if I recall correctly. It's like a yearly tournament where the best StarCraft 2 pro players in the Netherlands go and compete. And the original idea was to get my bot there as well, but I got sick some while ago before that, so I wasn't able to completely finish my bot for that competition. But I was there last year as well, the same idea that I also gave a presentation there. It was a different topic, it was more about the kind of AI algorithms that were being used in the StarCraft bots. I can explain it in a more simple manner. And this year the topic I chose was how the bots developed in Boudoir and how you're currently seeing the same kind of things in StarCraft 2 AI. And I did make one. I misspoke a little bit in one section, which Dave Churchill actually corrected me on. That's of course I was talking about how Dave Churchill managed to win in, I think it was 2013, with all these AI techniques like the build order search and the combat simulator, and also the certain build orders that they picked against. I think it was Skynet, Andrew Smith. Yeah, I forgot to mention that. I forgot to mention it was all of those things combined, which I meant to say, but probably because I was sick or whatever, I didn't properly mention it, which made it sound like the only reason why it won was because of the build order it picked against Skynet. That's not what I meant, Dave. I meant all of those things combined allowed you to win, like the build order search, the combat simulator, and things like that. And the idea was to then also say, like, there was still some hard coding going on back then, just like there is right now in the StarCraft 2 AI scene.
Yeah, no, that's fine. It was definitely a cheesy move on my part. For people who don't know what he was talking about, I noticed that the 2012 version of Skynet in my testing, it was completely vulnerable to any sort of invisible units and would just chase the invisible units around the map. So I just had a line of code in my bot that said, if Skynet, then build Dark Templars. And yeah, he just didn't know how to deal with it, and that helped me to win the competition.
But that wasn't the only thing, which the way I did my presentation, it sounded like that was the main thing which won, but that wasn't my intention, just to clarify.
I think you have reconciled the issue. There is no more blood feud between the two of you. And the thing you mentioned, hard coding opponent names, also stir up a controversy in the last few weeks. I think personally that it should be allowed, because why not? And even if you forbid it, it can be circumvented easily. But let's hear your thoughts on that. What do you think of hard coding opponent names?
How do you mean that it can be circumvented easily?
I mean, you can just experience or test it out, which bots do which things, and get a kind of signature and just use that. I mean, that's little more work, but I don't think it's impossible or even that hard.
I like how it's done in the StarCraft 2 scene. Don't get the actual name of the opponent, but just an ID, a number, and it varies from tournament to tournament. So you can learn from what the bot is doing and adapt to it, but you can't actually hard code something to the bot's name. And that means that the bot actually has to figure out itself what the is playing, and I think that itself is actually already a have. It's at least in terms of AI research a lot more interesting than someone checking a string to see who it's playing against.
By not revealing the actual real name but just some ID, you're essentially forcing AI developers to focus more on opponent modeling.
Oh yeah.
I can yeah, that's a really interesting topic, and it's come up a number of times whether or not in our competition we should have the bot names actually public before the competition. And so over the years, what we've decided for the aid competition is that you pick a string that's going to be your bot's name, and then your name and the bot name will be made public like a month before submission date. And our goal with that, so in one sense, it does sort of hinder AI development by giving you these sort of cheesy avenues to victory, like I did against Skynet. I just said, okay, doesn't do well against Dark Templars, so if I'm playing against Skynet, make Dark Templars. But at the same time, it helps you defend against these sort of one-trick pony bots that were doing well early on in the competition, like the 5-pool bots, or like Zimp, who was doing carrier rushes. And our feeling was that, these one-trick pony bots should be punished for being one-trick ponies. And the only real way to do that at the time, we didn't have like persistent file I/O or anything like that for actual learning over the course of a competition, was to make the names public, or the names of the bots. You would know who's competing. But at the same time, we also wanted it to be sort of like a human competition, insofar that, well, I know that this person really likes to go 2-hatch muta. And so in a human competition, you will know the person that you're playing against. It's not just like sort of a blanks, you can't see your opponent. You know exactly who your match is coming up. And so you could use some sort of offline learned knowledge about that person if possible. And I know, for example, that Facebook's Cherry Pie bot does this probably more so than anyone else, where they learn things about previous entries and then maybe use that information to say sort of seed their learning algorithms for the next year's competition. So there's a definite plus side to it and a negative side to it. But I think that for the foreseeable future, until it becomes a real problem, which I don't think it really has become yet, we'll continue to allow names in our competition. But at the same time, it also makes for two different types of opponent modeling. One is, like I said, this offline sort of opponent modeling, where you know what someone did last competition, therefore you could try to infer something that they're going to do this competition. And then there's the other online opponent modeling that Tira was talking about, where if you're only given like an integer ID and you don't know the, say, the bot author or what this bot was called last year, then that completely strips out all of the offline opponent modeling and makes it all online opponent modeling. And that is more so, a more modern AI type approach. So there's definitely not like one clear-cut answer of which is the best. It's just kind of what we've decided to follow over the years.
What's interesting is there has been quite a big discussion in the StarCraft 2 community about the ladder there, whether they should have those opponent IDs at all. There were a lot of people who wanted to get rid of it entirely, so that you wouldn't even be able to learn between different games. And I was very much against it, but there were a lot of people who really didn't like having that.
Well, I think that's, considering that the eventual goal is of course to have a bot be able to defeat a high-level human player, you kind of might want to at least have a tournament where you've got like the name of the opponent, just to simulate the kind of environments that you would be playing in if you were playing in an actual tournament like the Dutch StarCraft League itself. I think it will be very interesting to see both kinds of approaches, to see what one would bring over the other. But overall, I do think there should be at least one tournament where you've got it organized just kind of like a human tournament would.
Yeah, there's definitely you bring up a good point with regards to, there is a big difference, in my opinion, in trying to either A, write a bot that wins a competition, an AI competition, in which there are thousands and thousands of games played, or B, writing a bot that could beat a human player in just like a straight up best of 5. Because the first bot would probably rely on a lot of learning over time, knowing that, okay, I can try some strategies and see which one works and then use those over time to get a higher winning percentage, versus a bot that beats a human in like a best of 5 or best of 7 has to just be kind of more all around better and can't rely on sort of any gimmicky strategies like that.
Yeah, there is definitely difference between trying to win a tournament and researching AI, as you mentioned before. I feel like it. I feel this strongly as well. Rita, did I understand correctly then in the Dutch AI competition there were human versus AI games?
No, that was planned, but like I said, I got quite sick, and so I didn't manage to finish my bot there. And it was already quite a tight schedule, so it was either a presentation or the playing like a bot versus human and casting replay. So I choose to just do the presentation and a bit of QA afterwards, to the best of my abilities.
Well, I saw it. I think it was quite alright. So you have nothing to worry about.
Yeah, I was still a bit sick back then, but I guess I will.
Yeah, hardcoding opponent names. I still have a commit stashed somewhere where if my opponent is purple wave, I just concede the game and write that this one is for you then. But that's not really productive.
That would get you banned from our tournament.
I don't care. Worth it. Alright, I think the next big topic is that we had a little bit, tiny bit of confirmation that Blizzard might have been working on the BW API for StarCraft Remastered. Faint glimmer of hope, more than anything else, but what do you think about that?
Well, they set it at like the lowest priority, like P4. So I think it will still take quite a while, which is a bit of a shame, because I was like really looking forward to getting my bots to run on Remastered as well, because that's where most of the people who are playing Bootor are currently playing right now. Because 1.216 it still has ICQuip the server, but other than that, but even there it's like not abandoned, but you don't really see a lot of people playing on 1.16 anymore. So getting like a bot to play versus human, it's way more trouble now than it was a while ago. Because right now most people will be like, if it's 1.16, then either they don't have it or it's too much of a hassle to install it or things like that. So I do hope that it will come out this year, but considering that it's quite low priority, as they said on their post, I don't think it's going to be this year, unfortunately. Even though I'm looking very forward to it.
I think everyone does.
Yeah, that would be really amazing if there could be official Blizzard support from that, but I just don't know anything about it, so I can't really comment on the status of it.
Maybe you should invite Heiderman. What's his name? Adam Heiderman?
Adam.
Yeah, Adam Heiderman. Maybe you should invite him next on the podcast to talk about the Bootor API, because I think he's still working on the Bootor API 5, right?
Last time I spoke to him, he said it was still under development, but I believe he started kind of a busy job a few years ago and just hadn't had a lot of time to work on it. So I'm not sure about that status. But yeah, I think that he would be an excellent guest, because I think of anyone, he's the one who has really made StarCraft AI possible over the last 10 years. So he'd be an excellent guest if he would be willing to come on.
Oh yeah.
Well, he and Kovarex, but Kovarex is very busy as well, but Victoria.
Yeah, let's not diminish your achievements in that regard as well. Talking about Dave, but I could talk about all of you because all of you are very active and long time members of the community as well. So
I have a question, actually.
Go on.
Just to, like you said, long-time bot programmers, are there any features out there that people, like bot programmers like yourselves, that tournaments or ladders are currently lacking that you would like to see in future tournaments, and why?
I personally can't really think of anything right now.
I can't think of anything either, because we've had like a variety of tournaments, each with their own kind of style. So if one of them doesn't really suit you, you've already got the other ones. Like for example, if you want to have a closed source bot, you can use the Student StarCraft AI tournament. If you want to have a tournament where a lot of games are being played, you've got the 8 and the 6, and if you want a tournament it's more like a human kind of tournament, you once again got the Student StarCraft AI tournament. So there's already a variety of tournaments out there, each with their own rules and styles, and even live streams. So in terms of Bootor, I don't think I've got like anything really to add. in terms of StarCraft 2, well, there's a ladder, of course, but there hasn't really been there hasn't really been StarCraft 2 added to the scientific tournaments like the 8 and the 6 yet. So if there's anything about that, I would say adding StarCraft 2, because we've already got micro RTS as well, so that's not an RTS. So maybe if it's possible, you could add StarCraft 2 to the 8 or the 6 as well.
Yeah, I talked about that a little bit last time. Currently, with StarCraft 2, it is possible to run a tournament, but for AID, the way we have it set up is that every instance of StarCraft and the bot runs on its own virtual machine. So right now with StarCraft 2, with sockets, you can run bots on separate machines, but I believe the two StarCrafts have to be on the same machine. And so I've talked to the people at Blizzard about this, and they want this functionality in the future. I'm just not sure how high a priority is, because as soon as we have the ability to run the actual StarCraft 2 instances on separate machines and have them talk to each other, then we could actually run a StarCraft 2 AI competition with the same software that currently runs the Brood War AI competitions. And personally, that's the only way that I would ever run a StarCraft 2 competition, is that if I could maintain a single tournament software that did both, because it's just too much work to maintain two separate sets of software. So that is something that I've talked about with them, and hopefully in the next 2 years maybe I could do, but I just don't think there's a lot of people working on it, or it's a really high priority.
Really would love to see that, because so far the StarCraft 2 tournaments have all had numbers of matches, like best of 3 or best of 5 or something like that between the bots, but no big round-robin tournament with 100 games per opponent. That just doesn't exist in StarCraft 2 right now, and that would be as well.
For me personally, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would like to have an option when I can run a dedicated game versus an opponent, just with a click of a button. There is no functionality for that, right?
Well, in StarCraft 2, what you can do is, if you want to play against a bot yourself, all you really need is .exe and maybe some extra files in the same folder. But for StarCraft 2, it's actually quite easy to start up a game against a bot if you want to just play against it yourself. In Brood War, it's not that easy, but the Brood War API 5 was going to fix that, but that still has to be released.
No, it's not that hard, I admit. I would like to log in, pick an opponent, press a button, and do nothing else. That would be a really good thing to have, because I could just have a dedicated game, tailor my strategies against that opponent better. It's more of a matter of convenience and a quality of life thing.
Wasn't there something like that for Brood War that someone made, where it came with a bunch of different bots and you could just choose one from an interface?
Yeah, there's something like that as well, but the thing that Sonko describes is more like what they do in Dota 2. Because Dota 2 also has a bot API, but there you can use the Steam Workshop to just download the bot and just play against it without any kind of hassle. I think Sonko is more referring to that style of thing. But what you're referring to, Dave, is probably the Brood War Headless, I think it was.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, Lita is right. I'm moving more referring to that kind of thing. I think every bit of convenience that we add to this scene will increase the number of people participating. That's true for almost anything, but like the ease of use of the tools, the tournaments, and basically everything related to this scene will aid the goal of having more programmers, more participants in this. But feel free to disagree with me.
So I have one more question that I specifically for current good bot programmers like Ladybot and Tier. so a bunch of people have been asking me, like, what is kind of happening now. So, for example, in the last aid competition, Saida, who was written by Samsung, came first, and Cherry Pie, who's written by Facebook, came second. And specifically, Cherry Pie, part of their team was TSC Mu, who's been a first place champion in the past, Dan Gant, who's second place, and Gabriel Senev, who's a machine learning expert and previous bot author of Brood War Bot Q. And so now that you have these corporate interests in StarCraft AI funding, putting lots of money into these, paying the salaries of these people to write bots on their behalf, do you sort of see a future of StarCraft AI where it is almost impossible for student or hobbyist programmers to stay on top? And if so, is that like good? Is it bad? Does it make you happy? Does it make you sad? Because, for example, I think in the next aid competition, I want to introduce 2 new prizes at the very least, which is one is like the top single author submission and the top student submission. Not to run a separate tournament or anything like that, but just to say, okay, after the round robin stage, like after the competition is done, who was the top student? Because it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, for like a single master student now, I think, to just win the competition, at least in Brood War, because you have so much money being pumped into it. So I'd just be really interested to hear current bot authors' opinions on that.
Bots developed by the big companies, they are really very strong from everything I've seen from them. It's really hard, I think, for a bot author, for a single author to compete with that. So I like your idea of having some single author bots for students. Well, so far, I think single authors who can still kind of compete with these people, but it's getting harder and harder all the time. So I think in the future it will be able to win a bot tournament those big companies.
What you're suggesting there, Dave, is kind of like the CIG already does right now, where they've got young professional students who can earn prizes there. In regards to whether or not these companies will get ahead, well, as it stands currently right now, like I said, SEDA can still be bunker rush and other things are still working against it. Like Dan Grant, his single Autobot, can still take down SEDA. So I think it will still be quite a while before those companies can use their massive computers, CPUs and GPUs, to really do some lot of machine learning to take down amateur bots. I think that like 2019 and maybe 2020, there will still be quite some good amateur bots. I'm not sure about what will happen after that, but as it stands right now, amateurs will still stand a chance, I guess. Well, I predict.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. And someone else who I was talking to recently also brought up a good point where I mentioned having a top student prize. And they said, yeah, okay, so what happens in 2019 when there is one student who writes a bot from scratch and comes in maybe 10th place, but another student who downloads SIDA and modifies it and wins the top student prize? Does that person actually deserve to win the top student prize? Like, their bot was based on the work of a bunch of professionals. So it's even within itself, it's a difficult topic to award prizes for.
Yeah, but you've already disqualified some bots in the 8 who were way too similar, right? So you could apply the same kind of standards to certain bots if you want to give them prizes, right?
Yeah, but that's a whole other controversy. Anyway, I thought it was. I don't have an answer for it. I just thought it was interesting.
Or half the prize goes to the bot you were forked it from.
That would go against the spirit of the student prize.
Yeah, I'm just joking. I think personally it will matter when there are actually bigger prizes, bigger and maybe more frequent prizes for this. Because as you mentioned, it's getting harder and harder for students to compete. I don't know about professionals. I mean, I believe that professional developers who are good coders and take the time can still beat these AIs, but that might be no longer the case in the future. And also having a separate tournament, and also having these bots compete against each other without bounds, and having separate leagues are not mutually exclusive. You can have it both ways. We have the technology for that.
Yeah, because, for example, back in the early days, before there were a lot of bots that were sort of open source and well documented, I think that one of the major hurdles of bot AI development was just the software engineering problem of getting 20,000 lines of code to work together, or how many lines of code. And for several years at the beginning, if your bot had 0 crashes, that was considered a victory, and not even just winning the competition. And I think even UAlberta still has some bugs in it that I haven't been able to completely iron out, that other bot authors have pointed out to me. And so just having 2 or 3 professional programmers paid for by a company on a team is such a huge advantage before you even start talking about any of the AI. So yeah.
I mean, yeah, software engineering in itself, not just coding, because coding and software engineering are quite different things, helps a lot. And having a dedicated team, having planned goals, because I think most bot authors, and that's just my opinion, don't have detailed plans and manifestos for their bots. They just work on whenever and whatever they feel like. But correct me if I'm wrong. Your silence is taken as agreement. And speaking of students, Dave, another question to you. How would you encourage, what would you say to a student just trying to get to learn this whole StarCraft Brood War bot writing thing? I mean, you must have first-hand experience in the matter.
Are you saying that someone, like a student, is already interested, looking for advice on how to start, or am I trying to convince someone why it's a good idea to start?
A bit of both.
So when I was at University of Alberta, we had a course which was Compute 350, and in that course it was a games programming and C++ and AI so all of those topics, so games programming, AI programming, and C++ all in the same course. And for the final project of that course, you actually took UAlberta and modified it to, say, implement a bot that used spellcasters or dropships or whatever. And so that actually really motivated students, because it was working with a retail game that people were familiar with was really exciting for students. So I think that it doesn't take a lot to need to motivate people to work in StarCraft AI, because it's a very popular game. Anyone who likes gaming or programming is pretty naturally interested in that sort of thing. And so whenever I've approached students about working with StarCraft AI, they've always seemed very excited about it. On the other side, if there's people who are not interested in games or AI, it's very difficult to get them interested in something that has both. So I think it's either you're interested or you're not in that sort of thing. But for someone who is interested to sort of get started, of course I'm biased. I sort of point them toward my bot, UAlberta, because that's what I have experience with, and it's documented fairly well, and I could help them with it if they had questions with it. But usually what I do is say, okay, download the bot, read the source code, and just try and modify one little thing. So make a new build order, or tell the units to attack all the time instead of using the simulator or something like this. And it's actually a decent tool to actually teach C++ with as well, because in the classroom setting, I find that when you're being taught C++, you often don't get exposure to large projects, you're usually stuck like making Hello World or implementing a shared pointer or some theoretical busy work like that. And I think that exposing people to a large project gets them really good experience for industry or for later on in academia. And then within that large project, they can modify small parts of it and see how it all fits together. And so it's a nice tool for learning programming as well.
Yeah, and now also want to add as well, the Technical University of Delft in the Netherlands also has a course where they use StarCraft. They use it more for some kind of their own framework, but they've attached their own framework to the Bootstrap API. So you're essentially doing the same kind of programming that you normally were doing anyway with the projects, but now it's connected to the Bootstrap API as well. So that's quite interesting as well.
Rita, I saw that you had some publications related to StarCraft. How often are you in academic circles? Are you still working in that environment, or did you work?
Well, I used to do some publications. Those were more what's known as competition papers. They weren't really very extensive. I haven't really been that active in academic settings. I'm also not really a student anymore. But I might consider doing some more publications, depending on if I think it's really interesting and really useful to really write it down as an academic paper instead of just publishing the source code, because my bot has always been open source. So if I really think it's something that really adds some value to the academic world, I'll probably do another competition paper or something along those lines. But for the most part, I'll just open source things and help the academic StarCraft AI that way.
Sometimes it's there's a weird dichotomy where things that are publishable by an academic standard are usually more theoretical things that aren't yet directly applicable to bots. And so you'll find that the things that are more helpful in actually writing a StarCraft AI are more code-based or software engineering or little tips and tricks that aren't necessarily publishable because they're not interesting to academic conferences, versus the things that are more interesting to academic conferences are oftentimes algorithms or machine learning techniques which aren't currently capable of being put into a bot. And so it's this weird situation where the publishable things aren't the implementable things, and the implementable things aren't the publishable things.
It's very interesting for me because I'm coming from the other side, and I'm an enterprise developer, and I always felt there are so many time wasted, and so many things are not done that are already solved in professional software engineering. And yeah, it's very interesting to see the other side of that. Also, in academic circles, at least to my experience, gaming as a topic is kind of frowned upon. I mean, when I started the university, everyone I know wanted to be a game developer. When I finished it, I think one or two guys managed to do that. The others were mostly no longer interested. Cool.
That's more for the game industry with things like crunch time and things like that, which kind of dissuades people as well.
From an academic viewpoint, I think that 10 years ago that was really true, but at least younger faculty members, there'll always be those, hardcore old school computer science profs who don't think anything except, operating system and formal languages should be taught. But I think that nowadays, like, the video game industry is bigger than the music and movie industry combined, and I think they really see the value of working with video games. And especially in AI, games are such good test beds for AI that they really are like the standard for evaluating AI in academic publications now. And so it's definitely, in the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a huge swing to like pro gaming, I think, in academia.
And Tyr, let me ask you the same question. Do you have any publications or academic background related to StarCraft Brood War?
I haven't done anything for StarCraft Brood War. I did a computer science bachelor and a master, but nothing related to StarCraft.
And Dave, I'm asking you again. I think, yeah, I'm heavily featuring you in this episode. So, you mentioned that it is a good thing for someone interested in both AI and games. Were there any instances of people only interested in AI and not liking games at all? I'm really curious if that ever happened.
Oh, definitely. There are entire branches of AI that are not necessarily applicable to games. Like I know a few students who are working in NLP or natural language processing who have zero interest in games, and their the test beds that they have in their field of AI have nothing to do with games. So um, also people, there's thousands, I would say, of researchers who are doing like statistics and machine learning who have data sets that might be image processing or robotics based, or they have their own tests that that have nothing to do with gaming. And so I'm not trying to say that all AI or all programmers are interested in games, or that academics are have completely switched over. It's just that I think about a decade ago there was a sort of active disdain for people working with games as seen as sort of a non-serious type of research, whereas now the people not necessarily working in games don't necessarily have that same negative viewpoint of people who are working with games. But there are a lot of people who don't ever touch games, for sure.
Well, my question was more of your personal experiences, that you recommended people to work on StarCraft bots and they refused because bar gaming. But yeah, thanks.
Oh, I see. Well, I've had a couple of instances of my own students where I suggested working on StarCraft, but they didn't really like it. And so, for example, one of them is working on another game called Prismata, and another person didn't. I just suggested StarCraft because that's what I know, but this other student wanted to work on robotics or the Atari learning environment or something. And I have talked to a lot of undergrad students as well. Like, the majority of undergrads are generally interested in gaming, and they want to work in things related to gaming just because I think their courses so far have kind of been boring, especially introductory courses. So the ability to work on games is more exciting for them. But yes, I have personally asked people if they're interested in working in StarCraft, and they've just said no. I'd rather work on AI for other things.
Poor lost souls.
Yeah, they don't know what they're missing.
Alright, again, question for everyone. Do your bots utilize any kind of machine learning? I'm asking because we talked so much about that. And since most of our audience are technically well versed, feel free to elaborate on the technical details.
I already said during my introduction, I don't really use that many machine learning techniques, so no.
I myself am planning to do some genetic programming for micromanagement to learn like some game rules, and maybe in general like game rules like if this then that, then like hundreds or maybe thousands of those through genetic programming. That's what I'm currently focusing on, trying to do that working. So there will eventually be machine learning in my bot if that works correctly. But as it stands right now, there hasn't been anything added to any tournament version yet.
Feel free to talk about the plans.
Well, there's nothing concrete yet, so I've only got like idea and some programming. So you will probably hear about it later on, if.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I have no plans. But one of my students is working on. We're using the StarCraft 2 machine learning environment to work on reinforcement learning algorithms for like medium scale micromanagement in StarCraft 2. But I have no plans to put that into an actual bot anytime soon.
Yeah, we always come back to this topic that how necessarily it is to win, and so far I think it's not really well utilized. I mean, a few bots have machine learning, but they are not necessarily the winners of tournaments.
I don't think you really need machine learning. In fact, I think in a lot of situations, machine learning isn't really as good as a drafted rules, and sometimes even worse than that. So if you want to use machine learning properly, you really need to invest a lot of time and effort to get it right. If you don't do that, it just doesn't pay off.
Yeah, StarCraft is more complex than even Go, like a billion times more complex. So unless you've got some really good machine learning that can really find the answer in all of those possible combinations, you're better off just hard coding a rule that you know well, or just using some AI algorithm that works on a specific domain that you also know works well. That's a lot faster than waiting for machine learning to catch up and find through all of the possibilities some right answer, at least as it currently stands.
Yeah, I think it depends all on your goals, right? So if your goal is to just make the best bot for, say, next year's competition, then maybe taking a machine learning approach won't be as successful as writing a bunch of scripts or hard-coded rules or, heuristic search or something like that. But if your goal is to advance, say, the state of the art in machine learning, and you are simply using StarCraft as an experimental domain for that, then of course, that's, I think, where companies are coming in. So I'm sure that, beyond the press that companies will get from beating the world champion at StarCraft, they don't actually care about having a world champion StarCraft bot. What they're trying to do, and I'm not speaking for any individual company, but I'm pretty sure what these companies are saying is, hey, look at how smart we are. Our AI is so good that we can beat the world champion at Go or at StarCraft, therefore buy our product because our AI is smarter. And so that's where you really have this sort of market for machine learning, I think. But that being said, like DeepMind, their announcement at BlizzCon about like the current state of how good their purely machine learned bot is was remarkably good. I didn't think they'd be progressing that fast. They, like, in 1 year they went from like the SCVs attacking their own command center to being able to beat some gold players, I think, with a purely machine learned based StarCraft 2 bot. And that's not with that's with a like hard limit on the amount of micromanagement they're allowed to do and their APM. So, it's definitely slower to go the machine learning route, but I think in the end that as the techniques advance, it will probably produce an overall stronger bot than scripting could have accomplished. But maybe not for several years.
So we are not at the point where we need to keep an eye on AI research, because if it might give us an edge.
Well, it's not as simple as that. I think there's no black and white answer because, for example, if you're a company like DeepMind, and this is not saying anything good or bad about DeepMind, but they are far more capable of using advances in machine learning or reinforcement learning to build a better StarCraft bot than any of us are. And I don't just mean like single bot authors, but I mean even academic institutions. Because as we've seen over the past couple of years with things like AlphaGo or DeepStack or any of these other really big machine learning successes, is not necessarily DeepStack, but AlphaGo specifically, and even the new StarCraft machine learning that they're doing, is that you need a colossal amount of computation to pull this off. And so even if I had the best machine learning algorithm in the world, I simply would not have the money or the resources or the hardware to run that machine learning algorithm, whereas DeepMind or Facebook might have those resources. And so it's a really weird time, especially for academics in AI. It's kind of this, how do we publish better results when they're using millions of dollars of electricity to train these things, to the point where they're not even really saying anymore how much they've used, because maybe it's like an embarrassingly large amount, or okay, you have to generate all this electricity, so how much. You can start talking about how many like kilograms of carbon dioxide a StarCraft bot took to make. It's kind of crazy.
It's an interesting perspective, but I think this is a historical process when academia just paves the way forward. Then when it's profitable, companies take over and iterate and just get new things faster. It happened with computers as well.
I think a very interesting question is what happens if a company does create a machine learned, like if DeepMind next year has a bot that beats, whoever at StarCraft 2, whoever the world champion is. I haven't followed the scene in a while. But, they beat the equivalent of Flash at its prime at StarCraft 2. Then what? Like, StarCraft is the hardest game. Where do they go from there? I think that, there's this kind of bubble where we no longer have anything as complex game-wise as StarCraft to compare ourselves to. So, I don't know, it's just this, you can kind of see the edge of the AI world, I think.
We can always invent more complex and hard games. The question is, will that be interesting to anyone?
Yeah, because what I meant is that StarCraft 2 is the hardest game that still makes sense to humans. You can arbitrarily come up with something that has real valued action spaces and a trillion moves, but if humans can't play it well or visualize it, then it's not really an interesting problem.
Do you think it would be beneficial to AI research to have tournaments in this problem space, but with limited goals? For example, and this is a completely made-up example, implement a bunker rush, but you can't use more than 300 APM. Again, this is just something I pulled out of my ear right now.
So there's something interesting I think that happens in the planning community. So by planning I mean traditional heuristic search planning algorithms where actually I'm not sure if they use machine learning or not, but what happens is you would submit an algorithm and you get access to the model of the environment, and then you get told, for example, you will have 2 days or so much time on this amount of hardware to train before the competition starts. So they are not allowed to submit pre-trained models, so they can't go use 1 million GPUs to train their stuff on. So I think this is actually really interesting and levels the playing field a lot, where the focus becomes more on the techniques used and not on the amount of electricity used. And so that kind of relates to APM. And I know that some people have been talking about having competitions with lowered APM, but as I've said in the past, for our competition, we will worry about that once we start beating humans.
Okay, Tirlita, anything to add to the questions I've raised in the past few minutes? Because they've been stealing the show again.
So you asked about a tournament for restricted bots with limits and
We're solving sub problems really. So do you think it would be beneficial to AI research if there were not a tournament but like a prize for solving some subset of StarCraft problems in with some limited resources like limited APM?
Yeah, well, I think that could be interesting. Yeah, I don't know. You reminded me of the AITT, the AI Tiny tournament, which put a limit on the amount of the source code you could submit. So it was more of a for fun tournament. Really like the idea there. In academia, yeah, I do think you can use that stones to see how far we've progressed with the techniques and whether we can beat certain scenarios.
All right. Somewhat similar topic. Can you tell me about big challenge or achievement regarding your bot or a very hard problem that you solved? Because I myself like to talk about the hard programming problems I had to overcome. Usually no one is interested, but well, maybe the audience is a little.
For me, well, I'm not sure if there was anything that was really. There were some things like I did some code for finding wall-offs that is kind of complex, but not too much. In fact, I think the most difficult thing is what Dave Churchill also mentioned earlier. Entire bot to work together, like the entirety of the programming to structure everything. I think that is much harder than any of the individual tasks. But I think when I program, so I usually have something which would be very simple to explain to a human. Like I want you to do this. I want you to attack when you have something like that, and it becomes really difficult. Program even something as simple as that into the program. I want it to work together with all of the other things you've already built. So that's kind of engineering problem complex than anything specific I've ever done.
Yeah, for me it's also currently mostly the software engineering problem that's the big issue. But yeah, the generic programming that I'm currently working on is probably going to be the more complex thing in my bot, which hopefully will be done quite soon. But in terms of complexity right now in my bot, it's still the software engineering component mainly. Because the other AI algorithms, they are not easy either, but the overall making everything work together, that's still, especially since you're working on your own, it's still quite a difficult part.
Yeah, it's mostly like you don't have enough time to work on your stuff, I feel.
Yeah, I agree.
Time is short and code is long, as Dan very wisely said.
Definitely.
Alright, then with that, I think we are concluding this episode. Thank you very much for being there.
You're welcome.
Thanks again for organizing this. I think it's a really great thing for the community.
Thank you very much, and I hope to see you, each and every one of you, again. Goodbye.
Bye.